In 1542, a terrified young woman stood before her husband the king, knowing she would not survive the night. Her crime? Failing to produce a male heir. What happened next was so brutal that it was hidden from history books for centuries. Today, we're uncovering the truth about this king's reign of terror. Marie Louise Elizabeth Doran had her first taste of wine at 14. This wasn't some ceremonial sip at a royal banquet. Servants poured it as medicine, the only thing that could dull the terror of her wedding night with her own cousin. Royal archives show her parents signed the marriage contract when she was 9 to a man 12 years her senior. The French court called it politics. Doctors called it necessary to strengthen the bloodline. No one asked what Marie Louise called it. By her 15th birthday, she'd already lost her first pregnancy. The court physicians prescribed more wine to calm her nerves between attempts. There are accounts of servants finding her passed out in empty bathtubs, still clutching bottles. When she did carry children to term, they rarely survived infancy. Court documents list causes like weak constitution and failure to thrive. Medical code for what modern geneticists recognize as inbreeding defects. What makes Marie Louise's case different from other inbred royals? The alcohol didn't just mask her pain, it compounded the genetic damage. Researchers now believe chronic alcohol abuse can cause epigenetic changes, essentially locking genetic defects into future generations. When her third child died after just 3 days, the royal physicians noted the infant had a cleft palate and malformed hands, classic signs of fetal alcohol syndrome layered on top of existing inbreeding defects. The court solution? More forced pregnancies, more wine, more tiny coffins. Marie Louise's personal diaries describe drinking until she couldn't feel her face, until the portraits of her ancestors stopped judging her from the walls. By 22, she weighed under 90 pounds, but consumed nearly 2 liters of wine daily. When she finally died at 25, the official cause was a congestion of humors. The real cause was a system that treated royal women like defective broodmares. Here's the disturbing part. Marie Louise wasn't some outlier. She was the expected result of generations marrying first cousins. Geneticists studying her family's records calculated a 15% chance any child would inherit identical damaged genes from both parents. That's worse than the risks for children of siblings. The wine didn't cause her suffering. It just made it bearable long enough to produce more suffering. Her last surviving child, a daughter, lived to age 6. The autopsy noted the girl's enlarged liver and underdeveloped brain. The royal lineage continued through a different branch, but Marie Louise's bloodline ended right there. Not with a revolution or scandal, but with a child's body too broken to survive. Centuries later, we can see the truth. That wine cellar wasn't storing luxury. It stored the only anesthetic available for royal girls trapped in a genetic nightmare. When Maria I of Portugal married her uncle in 1759, the ceremony wasn't just a political alliance, it was a biological time bomb. Her parents had already been first cousins, making this union with her uncle even more dangerous. Historians calculate her inbreeding coefficient at a staggering 0.30, higher than if she'd married her own brother. For comparison, most modern couples share an inbreeding coefficient of less than 0.01. Maria's 6 pregnancies would expose the brutal consequences. 3 of her children died before reaching adulthood. One son survived infancy, but had such severe physical deformities that court painters were forbidden from depicting his full body. Autopsy reports describe defects including an abnormally small skull and malformed limbs, textbook effects of generations of intermarriage. The surviving children weren't spared either. Her eldest son, future King Joel VI, struggled with obesity and mental instability throughout his life, symptoms modern geneticists link to recessive gene expression. But the real tragedy unfolded in Maria herself. By her 40s, she began exhibiting signs of acute psychosis. Witnesses described her screaming about curses during state dinners, convinced her family was being punished by God. Court physicians diagnosed melancholia, but modern analysis suggests porphyria, a genetic disorder common in inbred European royalty. The disease causes insanity-like symptoms, including hallucinations and extreme sensitivity to light. Maria eventually became so unstable that her son had to rule as regent while she lived in isolation, wandering the palace corridors at night, clutching religious relics. Here's what the history books omit. Maria's madness wasn't random bad luck. Studies of her ancestors show 16 consecutive generations of first cousin or uncle-niece marriages in her lineage. Each union increased the likelihood that harmful recessive genes would pair up. The Braganza family wasn't cursed, they'd simply pushed the limits of human genetics too far. The final twist? Maria's bloodline didn't collapse from war or revolution, it withered from within. Her grandchildren inherited even worse genetic problems. Her granddaughter Maria II would endure 11 pregnancies, with only 7 children surviving past age 5. By then, the dynasty's fertility rates had dropped so dramatically that royals had to look outside Portugal for spouses, finally breaking the cycle. Maria's story shows how even absolute power means nothing when your own DNA turns against you. The screaming, the paranoia, the dead children, none of it was supernatural. Just simple biology playing out exactly as science predicted. Maria spent her final years confined to a darkened room in Rio de Janeiro, where the court had fled from Napoleon. Servants reported she still cried out about the curse, unaware that the real curse had been in her blood all along. When she died in 1816, her body returned to Portugal on a ship, the same route her ancestors had used to import new royal brides to keep the bloodline pure. The irony couldn't have been thicker if it was in the Habsburg jaw. Maria Antonia of Austria didn't just have a family tree, she had a family spiderweb. The Habsburgs had been marrying cousins, uncles, and nieces for over 200 years by the time she was born in 1669. Her parents were Emperor Leopold I and Eleanor Magdalene of Neuburg, but calling them parents is almost misleading. Geneticists calculate they shared so many ancestors that Maria Antonia's inbreeding coefficient hit 0.36. That's higher than if she'd been born to siblings. Her body showed the damage from day one. Contemporaries described her as sickly from childhood, prone to fits and fevers that baffled court physicians. The real cause wasn't mysterious. It was simple math. With that level of inbreeding, harmful recessive genes had no checks left. When she married Maximilian II Emmanuel of Bavaria at 23, she essentially married another Habsburg cousin. Modern analysis shows they likely shared more DNA than most siblings do today. Maria Antonia's pregnancies became a grim countdown. She suffered at least 4 miscarriages, each one leaving her weaker. The single child who survived, Joseph Ferdinand, lived just 7 years. His short life makes for brutal reading in the Bavarian archives. Constant illnesses, delayed development, and finally a sudden death officially blamed on water on the brain. Modern geneticists suspect hydrocephalus caused by congenital defects. What makes Maria Antonia's case worse than even the infamous Charles II of Spain? The Habsburgs had doubled down on inbreeding after seeing Charles's deformities. They believed only tighter bloodlines could purify the dynasty. The result was Maria Antonia, a woman so inbred her body could barely sustain pregnancy. Her siblings fared no better. Records show 5 of her brothers and sisters died before age 6, a staggering 71% mortality rate for Leopold's children. The Bavarian court whispered that Maria Antonia was under a curse. They weren't entirely wrong. It was just a curse made of Habsburg DNA. When she died at 30, she'd produced only one fragile heir who outlived her by months. Her husband remarried a non-Habsburg woman who promptly bore 7 healthy children, a fact the court physicians nervously avoided discussing. Here's what gets forgotten. Maria Antonia wasn't some outlier. She was the inevitable result of generations playing genetic roulette. The Habsburgs kept detailed marriage records that show a clear pattern. With each generation, life expectancy dropped. By Maria Antonia's time, the math was catching up. Her grandfather, Ferdinand III, had 13 children reach adulthood. Her father, Leopold, saw just 3 survive. Maria Antonia's line ended completely. Her story reveals a dark truth about royal inbreeding. It doesn't just weaken bloodlines, it erases them. The Habsburg Empire eventually crumbled, not from invasion or revolution, but from running out of viable heirs. Maria Antonia's empty nursery wasn't a tragedy. It was a warning written in DNA that nobody heeded. Today, geneticists use her family as the textbook example of how fast inbreeding depression can accelerate when you ignore the numbers. That spiderweb of a family tree, it wasn't just tangled, it was actively strangling itself. These queens didn't die from war or assassins. They were destroyed by their own blood. Maria Antonia, Marie Louise, their suffering wasn't fate or curses. It was simple genetics. The Habsburgs, Bourbons, and Braganzas weren't preserving royal lines. They were slowly poisoning them. That royal curse historians whisper about? Look at the family trees. Stillbirths, madness, deformities, all predictable results when you marry cousins for 200 years. Modern genetics proves these weren't curses at all. They were consequences.